The cabin lights of Flight 317 glowed softly as passengers settled into their seats. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly in shades of blue and silver, the early morning sun glinting off the wings. From the cockpit, Emily Hayes's hands rested lightly on the controls, her eyes scanning every instrument with a precision born of years she rarely spoke about. To anyone who knew her now, she was just a commercial co-pilot, calm, professional, efficient. But beneath that measured exterior was a past she had tried to leave behind, a past defined by supersonic speeds, classified missions, and a call sign few could ever forget. Valkyrie 1. The captain, a rookie on this route, tapped nervously on the autopilot panel. "Denver to Seattle is supposed to be smooth today, right?" he asked, attempting casual conversation. Emily didn't need to answer, but she offered a polite smile. "Smooth skies ahead. Turbulence minimal," she replied. Her voice was soft, yet carried an authority that only years of life-and-death situations could instill. The captain laughed nervously, unaware that the woman beside him had flown over hostile territory while being pursued by missiles, making split-second decisions that saved entire convoys. That was a life she'd once led, and now, quietly, tried to forget. Emily's gaze drifted to the horizon, where a thin veil of clouds stretched like a painting across the mountains below. Her mind wandered momentarily, recalling the roar of jet engines in desert skies, the adrenaline of evasive maneuvers, the taste of fear turned into focus. Flying a commercial plane seemed mundane compared to those days, yet there was comfort in routine, in the steady hum of engines beneath her hands. She checked the flight instruments again. Altitude steady, heading correct, fuel levels normal. Everything looked ordinary. Everything looked calm. For now. In the cabin, passengers chatted quietly, their conversations drifting up through the cockpit vents. A mother soothed the crying child. A businessman tapped impatiently on his laptop. A couple in the window seats pointed at the passing clouds. Emily had spent countless hours in crowded cabins, yet she never forgot the responsibility she carried. Every soul on board mattered. Every decision counted. She adjusted her headset and monitored the radios, a soft hum in her ears, connecting her to controllers far below. Routine, predictable, safe. Or so it seemed. The captain shifted in his seat, clearly trying to keep a casual air. "So, how long have you been flying commercially?" he asked. Emily's eyes flicked toward him, and a faint smile touched her lips. "A few years," she said. It was true, but it wasn't the full story. Before this, she had flown jets the world didn't even know existed. Her record was classified. Her achievements were hidden behind codes and top-secret files. To most, she was a co-pilot with a calm demeanor. To the few who knew her past, she was a legend, someone who had danced on the edge of death countless times, and always come out alive. She reached for the throttle and made a minor adjustment, feeling the subtle resistance under her fingers. Flying, even in a commercial plane, was still about feel. The hum of the engines, the vibration through the controls, the slightest shift in altitude, it all spoke to her in ways words could not. She glanced at the altimeter, noting a gentle drift upward. "Adjusting heading 2 degrees north," she said quietly, almost to herself. The captain nodded, trusting her implicitly, even if he didn't fully understand the depth of her expertise. Emily's thoughts wandered again, to a time when she had soared higher, faster, and farther than any commercial plane could take her. She remembered the missions where she had to navigate hostile airspace, evade surface-to-air missiles, and guide her squadron through impossible odds. She remembered the faces of those who didn't make it back, the weight of responsibility pressing down like gravity itself. That was the life that had forged her, the life she had tried to leave behind when she stepped onto the tarmac in her civilian uniform. Yet every time she took to the sky, Memories returned unbidden, like echoes in the clouds. A light ping from the radio brought her back to the present. Air traffic control checked in, routine acknowledgement, routine instructions. SkyWest 317, maintain heading 320. Weather en route minimal turbulence. Emily responded with practiced precision, her voice calm, steady, reassuring. No one listening would suspect the calm behind the words was built on years of combat experience, that her hands had once flown through fire and chaos, far beyond these predictable skies. The captain stole a glance at her again. "You ever get nervous?" he asked, half joking. Emily's lips curved in a faint smile, but there was no humor in her eyes. "Nervous doesn't help," she said softly. "Focus does." He nodded, clearly impressed, though he could not comprehend the layers beneath that simple answer. Focus. That had been her mantra in Navy training. During missions that stretched hours into agonizing stretches of life and death. Now it was what kept her calm over a routine flight. That and habit. Emily checked the cabin one last time on the internal monitor. Passengers were relaxed, reading, talking, dozing. She allowed herself a fleeting moment of peace, glancing at the sunlight dancing across the wings. For once, the sky felt safe, predictable. The mundane hum of a commercial flight seemed almost luxurious after years of high-speed jets and classified missions. Yet even in this calm, there was an underlying tension she could not shake. The air was too quiet, the horizon too clear. Sometimes, the world waits until the last second before showing its teeth. She leaned back slightly in her seat, taking a slow breath, savoring the rhythm of the engines, the steady pulse of life around her. She thought of the passengers she was responsible for, the lives entrusted to her hands, the quiet weight of duty that never left her. In her mind, she was no longer just a co-pilot. She was Valkyrie One again, a pilot with instincts honed to razor sharpness, ready for any challenge. But today, it was only routine. Today, it was calm. And then, in the distance, a flicker on the instruments caught her eye. A tiny anomaly, barely noticeable. The hum of the engines shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible. Emily's eyes narrowed. Focus sharpened. The horizon remained calm, but her instincts whispered something that no training could ignore. The calm is never permanent. Danger waits for no one, not even Valkyrie One. And in the quiet, golden sky above the mountains, she felt at the first ripple in what would soon become a storm that would demand everything she had ever learned. She glanced at the captain, who was busy scanning his own instruments. "Something wrong?" he asked. Emily shook her head subtly. "Just monitoring," she said. Her hands tightened on the controls, fingers brushing the throttle. The hum of the engines felt heavier, the sky a shade darker than it had moments ago. She didn't know what was coming, but one thing she did know. When it arrived, she would be ready. Always ready. That was the life she couldn't leave behind, no matter how far she flew from it. The sun continued its climb, oblivious to the lives gliding beneath it. Emily Hayes, ordinary co-pilot to the world, Valkyrie One to the few who knew, prepared for what the sky had planned. In that moment, suspended between calm and chaos, the story was only just beginning. For over 2 hours, Flight 317 had sailed through the sky without incident, the sun rising higher, glinting off the wings, casting golden reflections across the clouds. Inside the cockpit, Emily Hayes maintained her calm scanning instruments, adjusting minor throttle variances, coordinating with the captain. Everything seemed routine, almost serene. And yet, the faint hum in the pit of her stomach told her that the sky rarely stayed peaceful for long. Then, it began. A subtle flicker of lights across the instrument panel drew Emily's attention. Nothing catastrophic, just a momentary anomaly. She frowned, her instincts whispering caution. Electrical fluctuation, she murmured, more to herself than to the captain. Probably nothing. But the subtle warning sent a ripple through her trained senses. Her fingers hovered near the breakers, ready to act, while her mind scanned possible failures with the precision of a Navy flight deck checklist. A second flicker followed. Then the alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the panel. Warning signals screaming above the steady hum of the engines. Cabin pressure dropped instantly, and the smell of ozone filled the cockpit. The captain froze, his hands hovering over the controls as if the plane's own nerves had infected him. What the? I stammered. Systems failing. Altitude dropping, Emily. His voice cracked under tension. Emily's eyes narrowed, scanning gauges and dials at lightning speed. Flight 317 was in trouble, and she had seconds to respond. Her training kicked in immediately. Years of Navy combat had taught her that hesitation was death. With measured hands, she toggled backup systems, rerouted power manually, checked the hydraulics, and calculated emergency descent protocols. Cabin pressure dropping below safe limits, she announced air traffic control, her voice unnervingly calm. Passengers, oxygen masks deploy immediately. Behind her, the cabin erupted into chaos. Cries, coughing, confusion. The captain muttered something incomprehensible, but Emily's mind blocked out all distraction. She focused entirely on the plane, the instruments, the sky, and the mission. The radio sputtered and hissed. Every channel she tried came back static. Commercial frequencies had died. The hum of the engines faltered as she toggled switches. In rapid succession, flipping breakers, rerouting circuits. Sweat beaded on her forehead, despite the controlled chill in her voice. She reached for the emergency comms panel, her fingers steady despite adrenaline surging through her veins. The word came naturally, instinctively. Mayday. It had been 6 years since she'd uttered it in a real crisis. 6 years since Valkyrie 1 had flown missions that could have cost her life at any second. Now it slipped out automatically. Mayday, Mayday. This is SkyWest 317. We are experiencing critical systems failure. Assistance required immediately. Her voice was firm, commanding, precise. Everything the passengers needed to hear, everything the captain needed to cling to. But she added a final word, almost involuntarily. Her call sign from the past, Valkyrie 1. In an instant, her words traveled far beyond the commercial air traffic frequencies. Inside the command rooms of NORAD, her transmission triggered a chain reaction. Analysts froze, ears straining, eyes wide. Valkyrie 1? Whispered one officer. It can't be. The name was legend. Were the first female fighter pilots in the Navy, a woman who had flown cover missions for trapped convoys, surviving where others had fallen. Records had declared her retired, her missions classified. And now, above Nevada, her call sign cut through the static, alive and unmistakable. Emily didn't know the effect her words had caused. Her focus remained absolute. She toggled switches, rerouted auxiliary power to the engines, monitored fuel flow, and manually adjusted the autopilot. The captain's hands shook over the throttle. I can't, he began. Emily cut him off, voice steady. Listen, we're alive. Follow my lead. Every word was deliberate, every instruction rehearsed in her mind during countless simulations. We'll get this bird down safely. Focus. That's all that matters right now. She scanned the instruments again. The altimeter dropped dangerously fast. A warning tone blared. Cabin pressure had plummeted to critical levels. Oxygen masks deployed with a hiss across the cabin. Through the fog of panic, Emily's voice rose above the chaos. Remain calm. Oxygen on. Follow instructions. Her eyes flicked to the captain, then to the radio panel. static continued. The commercial channels were dead. All that remained was the emergency frequency and the one call she knew might get through, her old military call sign. Her fingers tightened on the comms knob. She spoke again, clear and commanding. Mayday. Mayday. Valkyrie 1, requesting immediate assistance. We are unresponsive to normal comms. Emergency descent required. Repeat. Emergency descent required. The words carried authority and precision, the cadence of someone who had saved lives under fire. She didn't waver, even as alarms blared, lights flickered, and the captain's hands quaked beside her. The cabin might have been filled with panic, but the cockpit exuded a different energy. Control, competence, and a stubborn refusal to give in to fear. Miles away, NORAD scrambled to respond. Analysts debated the credibility of the transmission, a commercial flight certainly, but a call sign that belonged to a combat legend? Without hesitation, they initiated a scramble protocol. 2F2. Raptors roared to life from Nellis Air Force Base, engines screaming as they climbed into the clear blue sky. In the cockpit of each fighter, pilots exchanged tense glances. They had heard stories about Valkyrie 1, seen her name in training manuals, but she had been retired, classified, untouchable. And yet, here she was, transmitting a mayday from a civilian aircraft in distress. Back in Flight 317, Emily adjusted the throttle manually, feeling the subtle resistance beneath her fingers. One engine sputtered, the other groaned under the strain of manual override. Cabin lights flickered. Oxygen masks hung from above, swaying gently. Passengers fumbled in confusion, crying out to one another. The captain's face was pale, eyes wide, his voice trembling. Emily's hand brushed his arm briefly. "Trust me," she said softly. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command rooted in decades of training, experience, and survival. And for now, it was all they had. She checked the heading, altitude, and rate of descent. Each calculation had to be precise. Too steep a descent, and the plane could break apart. Too shallow, and they wouldn't reach an emergency airport in time. Lightning flashed in the distance, casting a brief, stark light across the cockpit. She allowed herself a flicker of memory. Past missions where missiles had streaked past her wings, where she had performed impossible maneuvers, where failure meant death. That memory fueled her now, the instincts honed in life-or-death situations becoming her lifeline. The radio hissed once more. A voice cut through, garbled but clear enough. "SkyWest 317. Identify yourself." Emily's pulse quickened. This wasn't air traffic control. This was military. She didn't panic. Her voice, steady and calm, carried across the static. "This is co-pilot Emily Hayes, SkyWest 317. Call sign Valkyrie 1. We are experiencing critical system failures. Emergency descent in progress." Silence followed. Then a second voice, more confident, more measured. "Valkyrie 1? Affirmative. Hold your course. We are responding." Emily exhaled slowly, though her hands never relaxed. The first recognition. The first acknowledgement from someone who understood the gravity of her skills and experience had arrived. But there was no time to celebrate. The plane was failing. Systems were down, and hundreds of lives depended on her ability to remain calm, to think clearly, and to act decisively. For Emily Hayes, there was only one thought, one mantra: survive, guide, protect. As Flight 317 continued its precarious glide above the Nevada mountains, Emily's eyes swept the instruments again. Every flicker of a light, every beep, every warning became data, a puzzle she had to solve in real time. She could hear the faint echo of the cabin behind her, panic and fear mixing in the air. She ignored it, focusing entirely on the plane, the skies, and the mission. Valkyrie 1 was back in action, even if the world below had no idea. And in that moment, hovering between calm and catastrophe, Emily Hayes realized that this wasn't just a mechanical failure. It was a test, a challenge. And for the first time in years, she felt truly alive, fully alive in the sky, with every skill she had honed in the crucible of combat now demanded once more. The moment Emily Hayes spoke her call sign, the air above Nevada shifted. Her words, Valkyrie 1, didn't just traverse frequencies. They cut through bureaucracy, through protocols, straight into the ears of NORAD officers and Air Force pilots who hadn't expected to hear that name again. In the control room, a young analyst froze, pencil hovering over a notepad. Valkyrie 1? She whispered, disbelief heavy in her tone. It can't be. The name was legend. Lieutenant Commander Emily Hayes, once one of the first female fighter pilots in the U.S. Navy, known for her ice-cold precision under fire, had vanished from public record 6 years ago. Her missions were classified. Her return had never been documented. To NORAD, a commercial flight using that call sign was an impossible scenario. And yet, the static-laden transmission on the emergency frequency confirmed it. Alive, flying, in trouble. Commanders sprang into action. Scramble F-22 Raptors immediately. Nellis Air Force Base. I want 2 jets airborne within 3 minutes. The order cut through the room like a whip. Pilots sprinted toward their jets, mechanics fueled engines, and mission control traced the coordinates from the faulty transponder signal. The situation was unprecedented. Valkyrie 1, once an operative in high-stakes aerial combat, now commanding a failing commercial aircraft, was calling for help. And the stakes could not have been higher. In the cockpit of Flight 317, Emily's fingers danced across switches and toggles. The instruments flickered and beeped in protest, the hum of the engines growing uneven. She ignored the rising panic from the captain beside her, focusing entirely on the plane's failing systems. Years of high-pressure combat had taught her that fear was a distraction, and she could not afford to be distracted now. Her voice remained calm, measured, commanding. Cabin pressure critical. Maintain oxygen. Emergency descent in progress. Every word was deliberate, designed to reassure the passengers while communicating control to herself. She did not yet know that the military had already recognized her transmission. The acknowledgement, however, would change everything. A secure channel crackled to life. SkyWest 317. Valkyrie 1. Hold your course. We've got you, a voice said, calm but authoritative. It was the first human confirmation that someone in the air somewhere understood exactly who she was. Emily's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the strange, grounding realization that she was not alone. Not this time. Meanwhile, in the sky over Nevada, the F-22 Raptors tore through clouds with deafening speed, contrails slicing through the blue. Pilots inside the cockpits recognized the challenge instantly. They were trained for hijack scenarios, aircraft emergencies, and rapid intercepts, but this was different. The call sign alone changed the calculus. Valkyrie 1 had been a legend in fighter pilot circles. She had once flown top-secret missions, evaded enemy missiles, and brought teams home from impossible situations. To encounter her again, alive and commanding a crippled plane, was like meeting a ghost that had suddenly materialized in front of them. Copy that. Valkyrie 1, we've got your 6, the lead pilot said into his headset, voice steady despite the surreal nature of the mission. The junior pilot beside him swallowed hard. He had grown up hearing stories of the woman who had flown into hostile airspace over Syria, covering convoys trapped under fire for hours. She was tactical, precise, almost mythical in reputation. And now, she was calling for backup in airborne civilian aircraft in distress, her skill still alive, still sharp. Emily adjusted the throttle manually. One engine sputtered, the other strained under the emergency load. Cabin pressure remained critical. Alarms shrieked, red lights flashed across the panel, and passengers moved in panic. Through the chaos, she remained a calm center, guiding the captain with clear, precise commands. "Do not panic. Follow my lead," she said. He nodded, gripping the yoke as his knuckles whitened. I trust you," he whispered, almost in awe. And indeed, trust was all they had. Experience, calm, and precision were the only shields between Flight 317 and catastrophe. From the ground, NORD monitored every move. Analysts recalculated flight paths, factoring in the failing systems and the mountainous terrain below. "She's holding altitude manually," one officer noted, eyes scanning instruments. "And she's stabilizing descent rate perfectly. No commercial pilot should be capable of this." Whispers spread through the command center. Valkyrie 1, presumed retired and classified, was alive, fully capable, and flying a commercial aircraft in conditions that would have flustered even the most seasoned professionals. Back in the cockpit, Emily glanced at the horizon. Clouds stretched like barriers across the sky, sunlight glinting off peaks below. She calculated angles, estimated wind speeds, adjusted flaps and rudders with precise timing. Every movement was deliberate, almost surgical. The F-22s would arrive shortly, and she had to keep the plane under control until they did. She could feel the weight of lives pressing down, the responsibility settling like lead in her chest. Hundreds of passengers, a rookie captain, and her own legacy all converged in a moment of high stakes. The first F-22 appeared as a silver silhouette against the clouds, engines roaring, turning the sky into a corridor of protection. Emily recognized the formation protocol instantly. She had flown this maneuver countless times, albeit in military jets with far more power and speed. She adjusted her heading slightly, signaling acknowledgement without leaving room for error. The second F-22 arrived in perfect synchrony, flanking Flight 317 like guardians. The pilots, seeing her in the cockpit and hearing her voice, could feel the precision and confidence radiating from her actions. Valkyrie 1 was back in the air, alive and commanding, and they followed her lead instinctively. Inside the cabin, passengers were unaware of the drama unfolding just feet above their heads. Oxygen masks hung from ceilings, murmurs and cries echoed in the aisles, and yet the flight felt strangely steady. Emily's presence, unseen and unrecognized by most, acted as a calm anchor. Her mind moved faster than the instruments could display. She calculated fuel ratios, descent angles, and throttle adjustments in real time, her Navy-honed instincts compensating for every failing system. Every minor adjustment was critical. Every miscalculation could mean disaster. And yet, for all the tension, she remained the calm center, the Valkyrie 1 of legend, guiding them through. The NORAD control room buzzed with activity. "She's flying manual, full control," one analyst reported. No autopilot, no functional systems aside from emergency power. A commander leaned over, studying the radar display. "She's doing what?" "That's impossible for a civilian pilot." Across the room, heads nodded in recognition. They knew who she was. They knew what she could do. And they realized that, against all odds, she might just bring this flight down safely, because she always had in the past. Emily's voice cut through the chaos of alarms and the captain's nervous muttering. "Maintain heading 320. Watch your descent rate. Adjust flaps at 1,500 feet. You've got this," she instructed, not to the captain, but almost to herself, a mantra that grounded her in the eye of the storm. She had flown through fire before. She had faced missiles, enemy fire, impossible odds. Flight 317 was no different, in principle. Lives depended on her, and she would not fail. As the F-22s fell into formation, the distance closed rapidly. Radar confirmation, visual recognition, and synchronized flight meant that Emily now had allies, invisible to the passengers, but essential to survival. She adjusted rudder and throttle to allow them to flank safely, signaling acknowledgement through subtle wing movements and minor heading changes. The pilots of the Raptors, trained for aerial engagement, now followed her lead, confident in the skill radiating from the cockpit of a commercial airliner. Valkyrie 1 had returned, and the sky itself seemed to bend to her expertise. Yet even with recognition, Emily knew there was no room for error. The engines groaned, cabin alarms continued, and the plane still shuddered under manual control. She kept scanning instruments, adjusting angles, maintaining altitude as much as possible. She could hear the captain muttering under his breath, fear mixed with awe. "I've never seen anyone do this," he said. Emily allowed herself no distraction, only focus. Every instinct, every skill she had ever acquired, converged in this single critical moment. This was survival. This was duty. This was Valkyrie 1. The moment stretched, tense and fragile, as the F-22s closed further. Emily's hands, though steady, carried the weight of every life on board. Her eyes flicked between the horizon, the instruments, and the oxygen pressure gauge. She knew the next minutes would define whether Flight 317 would survive or become another tragic statistic. But she also knew that she had been here before, in far deadlier skies, facing far worse odds. And history, it seemed, had decided to repeat itself only this time. The lives she saved were hundreds of innocent civilians instead of a military convoy. The roar of the F-22 Raptors grew louder, slicing through the Nevada sky with a precision and speed that made the commercial jet beneath them look fragile, almost slow. Emily Hayes, hands steady on the throttle and yoke, felt a flicker of recognition. She had flown alongside aircraft like these countless times, guiding and commanding formations under hostile conditions. But this was different. These weren't Navy jets on a training exercise. They were intercepting a civilian airliner, her plane, and she was the one in control, guiding them, keeping everyone alive. "Formation in place," she said softly, more to herself than the captain, though the words carried authority into the cockpit. The first F-22 fell into a perfect position to her left, engine afterburners leaving a silver contrail behind. The second joined the right flank, wings angled for a flanking pattern. Emily calculated angles instinctively, signaling with subtle maneuvers. A tiny tilt, a gentle bank. The Raptors understood. She didn't need words. The pilots recognized her skill immediately, even if only over the radio frequency. Valkyrie 1 was back, alive, commanding, guiding. Inside Flight 317, the captain's fear was palpable. I've never flown with jets like this right on my wing," he stammered, his hands trembling. Emily gave him a brief, sharp look. "Focus. Follow my instructions. The jets are not threats, they're guides. Trust me." Her voice was calm, but edged with an authority he had never heard before. The calm reassurance did not mask the gravity of the situation, but it anchored the captain. Every word, every command, was deliberate, chosen to prevent panic and maximize survival. She adjusted the yoke, banking the plane ever so slightly to indicate alignment with the F-22s. Outside, the jets responded, creating a visual corridor through the air. Emily's mind raced, engine power fluctuating, cabin pressure critical, descent angle crucial. Each adjustment had to be precise. Too steep, and the plane could falter. Too shallow, and they wouldn't reach an emergency landing site in time. She scanned the horizon and the mountain ranges below, calculating wind shear, turbulence pockets, and safe descent corridors. Every data point mattered. Every second counted. The F-22s relayed critical information over secure channels. SkyWest 317. Heading adjustments minor. Altitude correction in 5 seconds, the lead pilot said. Emily acknowledged with a subtle flick of her yoke, maneuvering the plane accordingly. The co-pilot, the captain, and she were synchronized, though only Emily fully understood the intricacies of the operation. Outside the cockpit, passengers remained oblivious, some dozing, some fidgeting with their masks, unaware of the high-speed military ballet guiding them safely toward terra firma. A sudden jolt rattled the cabin as the right engine sputtered dangerously. Emily's hands went to the throttles instinctively, nudging them with precision to maintain balance. Alarms screamed across the panel. Engine 1 dropping to 30%. Compensate with throttle 2, she instructed. The captain followed without question. Yes, ma'am, he said, voice shaking. Emily's pulse remained steady, her breathing controlled, her mind a calm machine processing emergency data. Years in combat had trained her for moments like this, where hesitation could mean death. Lightning flashed across the mountains, illuminating the cockpit in stark white. Emily's eyes narrowed. The weather was an unpredictable variable, and she had no luxury of autopilot. She adjusted rudder and flaps in perfect coordination, guiding the plane as if performing a complex aerial dance. Outside, the F-22s mirrored her movements, keeping formation and providing visual navigation for both the incapacitated instruments and the faltering commercial jet. You've got this, she murmured under her breath, though her voice carried into the radio channel, giving assurance to the pilots beside her. Inside the cabin, passengers murmured in confusion, some noticing the streak of fighter jets through the clouds. Flight attendants tried to reassure travelers, though their own anxiety was palpable. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm, one said over the intercom. We're being assisted by military aircraft. Everything is under control. Few understood the depth of control, the split-second precision, or the true nature of the crisis. They only felt the strange steadiness amid chaos, a calm center embodied by the unassuming co-pilot at the front of the plane. Emily's eyes darted to her instruments. The right engine's throttle needed constant micro-adjustments. Cabin pressure remained critical, descending steadily, but not yet dangerously. She calculated landing coordinates and distance to Reno, factoring in elevation, wind, and current descent speed. Then she looked outside at the F-22s. The lead jet's pilot recognized subtle cues, slight wing tilt, minimal yoke adjustments, all indicating minute heading corrections. They executed them flawlessly, their speed and maneuverability compensating for the commercial jet's slower responsiveness. Prepare for emergency descent sequence, Emily said to the captain, voice calm, precise. Flaps 30 degrees. Maintain angle of attack at 15. Descend at 1,500 feet per minute. Watch your speed. Trust the jets. She toggled the auxiliary power switch to maintain rudder responsiveness and keep hydraulic systems alive. Every calculation was exact, every movement intentional. The Raptor pilots mirrored her actions, keeping the formation tight, ensuring Flight 317 stayed stable despite the failing systems. Minutes stretched like hours. The mountains rose beneath them, an unforgiving maze of rock and wind. Emily's instincts guided her through every turbulence pocket, every crosswind, every shadow of cloud. She spoke calmly to the captain, giving instructions that were both technical and reassuring. We're aligned. Minor corrections only. Watch your instruments. Follow my lead. The captain nodded, hands white on the yoke. Trust, building through repeated, precise guidance. Then the F-22s transmitted a new warning. SkyWest 317. Significant wind shear approaching 10 miles ahead. Reduce speed by 5 knots. Maintain descent. Emily's mind processed the instruction in milliseconds. She adjusted throttles, flaps, and rudder without hesitation. The plane shuddered violently, alarm screaming, but she held steady. The co-pilot followed instinctively, mimicking her movements. Outside, the Raptors held formation like shadows, guiding the civilian aircraft through invisible hazards that only a trained eye could recognize. The sky grew darker, clouds thickening, rain beginning to streak across the windshield. Emily's pulse remained calm, her breathing controlled. "Cabin pressure stable," she announced, though it was only marginal. Oxygen masks remained deployed. She calculated the remaining distance to the emergency landing site. 7 minutes at current descent. 7 minutes to bring hundreds of lives safely to ground. 7 minutes to prove that Valkyrie 1 was not a relic of the past, but a force in the present. Time blurred. Instruments, clouds, engines, and formation jets merged into a single stream of data. Emily's brain worked with military precision, adjusting, calculating, predicting every move. The Raptor pilots were not just guides, they were her partners, responding instantly to every subtle cue she offered. Outside, lightning flashed again. Rain streaked across the cockpit glass, but the formation held. The world seemed to narrow to 3 elements: the plane, the jets, and the horizon. Finally, she transmitted to the Raptors, her voice steady, calm, unwavering. "Prepare for approach. Visual confirmation of landing path only. I will maintain glide and descent. You are my eyes." A pause, then acknowledgement crackled through. The F-22s adjusted formation for final approach guidance, flying perfectly aligned, every movement mirrored and coordinated. Emily's eyes flicked to the captain. "We've got this," she said softly, a rare smile touching her lips. He nodded, relief mixed with awe. Together, they would face the next stage of the crisis landing. The mountains loomed beneath Flight 317, jagged peaks piercing the clouds like dark teeth. Emily Hayes's hands clutched the yoke with quiet authority, guiding the crippled aircraft through turbulence and failing systems. Each gust of wind, each shudder of the engines, was data she absorbed instantly. The Raptors on either side mirrored her maneuvers, their afterburners streaking silver through the storm-smeared sky. She was in full control, but the weight of responsibility pressed like iron across her chest. Hundreds of lives depended on her decisions. One miscalculation, one hesitation, and there would be disaster. "Captain," Emily said calmly, though her eyes never left the instruments, "prepare for emergency descent." "Follow my lead exactly." The man's hands shook, gripping the throttle and yoke, as if his fingers could steady the plane themselves. I don't know if I can," he muttered. Emily's gaze softened briefly. "Yes, you can. Trust me. Trust the process. Follow my instructions and nothing bad will happen." Her calm confidence, honed in the crucible of combat, became the anchor for both the captain and the passengers she could not see. She toggled the auxiliary power again, ensuring rudder and flaps remained responsive. The right engine groaned dangerously, losing thrust in fits. The left engine strained under load. Emily made micro-adjustments to maintain balance, banking the plane imperceptibly to distribute weight and compensate for thrust discrepancies. Every flicker of the instruments was interpreted instantly. Every quiver of the fuselage communicated data she could translate into survival. Her mind moved faster than any autopilot, faster than fear itself, calculating descent angles, thrust, airspeed, and altitude second by second. The Raptor pilots on either side were awed by her control. They had flown alongside Valkyrie 1 in simulations and in history. Now they witnessed the impossible. A commercial airliner, failing systems, approaching treacherous terrain, and yet she maintained formation, as if the plane were an extension of her own body. She's doing it manually, one pilot whispered over the secure channel. Unbelievable. She's guiding us. Each subtle tilt of the plane, each minor throttle adjustment, communicated precisely what they needed to know. The Raptors became partners in her silent choreography. Lightning streaked across the mountains, illuminating the cockpit in stark white. Emily's eyes narrowed, scanning instruments, horizon, and terrain. Rain streaked across the windshield, reducing visibility to a few hundred feet. She whispered calculations, almost to herself, but loud enough for the captain to hear. Flaps 30 degrees. Reduce speed by 5 knots. Maintain angle of attack 15. Minor rudder adjustments only. Watch descent rate. Watch ground clearance. Every word was critical. Every command timed perfectly. The captain repeated after her, following her lead, his fear tempered by trust. Inside the cabin, passengers clutched their armrests, murmurs of alarm spreading. Flight attendants moved quickly, but cautiously, guiding those seated in panic to secure positions. Oxygen masks remained deployed, and the hum of air pressure systems created an eerie rhythm. No one realized the full extent of the danger. To them, it was turbulence, perhaps an emergency descent. They could not see the jagged mountains, the failing engines, or the fighter jets flanking them like guardians. All they could sense was a calm voice over the intercom, guiding them toward safety. Emily scanned the horizon, noting the approach to Reno and the potential landing site. The descent had to be exact. Too steep, and the plane could structural fail under stress. Too shallow, and the runway wouldn't reach them in time. Wind shear, turbulence, and failing instruments made this a delicate balance of skill, calculation, and instinct. She adjusted the yoke subtly, leaning into a cloud pocket to stabilize lift, while commanding the throttles with precision. The plane shuddered violently, but she held steady. Every second counted. Every micro-adjustment mattered. The F-22s relayed critical weather updates and altitude corrections. SkyWest 317. Approach path cleared visually. Adjust heading 2 degrees left. Wind shear at 12 miles ahead, the lead pilot said. Emily responded with a slight tilt of the yoke, signaling acknowledgement. Her eyes flicked to the captain. Follow exactly. Watch my instruments. Match adjustments. Don't deviate. He nodded, gripping the controls, trusting her instinct and experience completely. Together, they became a single unit co-pilot, Captain Valkyrie 1, navigating death with precision. She adjusted rudder and throttle to compensate for turbulence, constantly scanning the instruments and horizon. Rain lashed at the windshield, visibility dropping further. Lightning illuminated jagged peaks far below, shadows that could easily become obstacles if the plane drifted off course. Emily whispered calculations under her breath. Vertical speed, 1,500 feet per minute. Maintain glide slope. Heading correct. Altimeter checked. Flaps stabilized. Every action was deliberate, precise, controlled, and necessary. Minutes passed like hours. Each jolt of turbulence, each warning beep, was processed instantly. Emily's focus was absolute. Panic had no foothold. The F-22s remained in formation, signaling minor corrections with subtle wing tilts and engine flares. Outside, the mountains seemed relentless, unforgiving, yet they became guides in her calculations, visual markers for descent and orientation. The cockpit was a chamber of concentration, a world where every fraction of a second determined life or death. Finally, the runway at Reno came into view through the rain and clouds, illuminated faintly by emergency lights on the tarmac. Emily's eyes narrowed, scanning for crosswinds, surface obstacles, and remaining altitude. Flaps 40 degrees. Reduce speed 20 knots. Prepare to glide onto landing strip. Touchdown velocity calculated at 140 knots, she murmured to the captain. His nod was tense, but precise. Understood, he said, voice calm now, shaped by her steady authority. Lightning struck again, highlighting every detail of the runway. The engine screamed under strain as she adjusted thrust to compensate for wind shear. The Raptor pilots mirrored her movements, holding formation and signaling minor corrections for alignment. The plane's nose tilted slightly downward, glide angle precise, altitude dropping toward critical range. Passengers braced instinctively as the aircraft shuddered. Emily's hands were steady, eyes locked on instruments, mind calculating every variable in real time. Landing gear confirmed down. Flaps maxed. Maintain glide slope, Emily instructed. The captain repeated commands, hands precise now, confidence slowly building under her guidance. Oxygen levels stabilized. Cabin pressure remained critical, but manageable. Outside, the runway lights grew brighter, cutting through rain-smeared clouds. Emily whispered to herself, "We're almost there." Trust formation. Trust controls. Trust instincts. The moment was fragile, suspended between survival and disaster. The plane hit the tarmac with a jarring jolt, tires squealing against wet asphalt. Emily's hands guided it with precise reverse thrust, gradually slowing the massive aircraft. The F-22s flanked her, pulling slightly away, giving clearance while signaling final guidance. Sparks flew as the tires burned against the runway, and emergency lights flickered across the ground. The passengers gasped and clutched each other, unaware of the intricacy and precision that had just saved them. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Flight 317 came to a complete stop. Silence settled, punctuated by the hiss of engines winding down. Emily leaned back slightly, hands finally relaxing, pulse steadying. Around her, the cabin remained tense but alive. She exhaled, knowing that hundreds of lives had been saved by focus, skill, and trust. The Raptor pilots flew overhead once more, circling before peeling away into the clouds, a silent salute to the co-pilot who had guided them all to safety. The captain turned to her, eyes wide with awe and disbelief. I don't even know how to thank you," he said, voice shaking. Emily gave him a faint, tired smile. "Just fly safe," she replied softly, already mentally transitioning from crisis mode to debrief mode. The passengers began to cheer and cry, unaware of the precise coordination, split-second decisions, and life-or-death calculations that had brought them safely to the ground. Outside, the runway lights reflected off rain-slick tarmac. The F-22s disappeared into the clouds. And Emily Hayes' commercial co-pilot to the world. Valkyrie one to those who knew her stood at the center of calm after the storm. The wheels of Flight 317 ground against the tarmac, sparks dissipating as the plane gradually slowed. Emily Hayes exhaled softly, though her eyes remained vigilant. Thousands of thoughts raced in her mind. Systems check, passenger safety, coordination with emergency services. The adrenaline from the emergency descent was still simmering under her calm exterior, a familiar burn that reminded her she was alive and in control. The F-22s had peeled away, leaving her and the captain to bring the plane to a complete stop on the rain-slick runway. The passengers, now aware that the plane had landed, erupted into mixed sounds of relief, awe, and gratitude. Crying, laughter, whispered prayers, and gasps filled the cabin. Flight attendants moved quickly, helping passengers remove oxygen masks, checking on children, and ensuring that everyone remained seated until ground personnel could reach the aircraft. Emily's voice, calm and authoritative over the intercom, guided them. "Remain seated. Crew will assist you shortly. You are safe. We are working with emergency services." The tone was steady, yet every word carried reassurance born from decades of crisis experience. The captain beside her, still visibly shaken, stared at the controls in disbelief. I can't believe we're on the ground," he muttered. Emily offered him a rare, faint smile. "You did exactly what you were supposed to," she said. "I just guided. You followed. That's all that matters." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. In that moment, he realized that he had been under the command of someone whose skill, calm, and decisiveness could steer hundreds of lives through near-certain disaster. Outside, emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, and airport security rushed toward the plane. The ground was slick with rain, and emergency lights reflected against the wet tarmac. Emily opened her side window to speak with ground control. "We've landed safely. Passengers stable. Proceed with emergency evacuation protocol," she instructed. Her words were calm, but precise, efficient, commanding respect and immediate action. She had switched from the intense focus of flight to the structured control required on the ground, seamlessly adapting to a new stage of the crisis. Paramedics and firefighters quickly began their procedures, assisting passengers out of the aircraft. Emily observed silently, noting that everyone moved quickly yet efficiently under instruction. She had trained for such coordination in military operations, where evacuation and triage were as critical as combat maneuvers. Even in a civilian crisis, she approached the situation with the same disciplined mindset. "Ensure oxygen levels remain stable," she reminded the paramedics. "Check for signs of stress or shock. Minor injuries first, then follow up." Her voice was calm, yet every command carried authority born of experience. In the control tower, news of the successful landing spread rapidly. NORAD, having tracked the entire incident, scrambled communications. Analysts whispered, "It really was Valkyrie 1. We didn't think she was active anymore. And yet, here she is." Her name circulated quickly, sending ripples across military channels. Even retired officers, hearing the call sign broadcast over emergency channels, paused in disbelief. Emily Hayes, classified and legendary, had emerged from obscurity to save hundreds of civilian lives. For the first time in years, the world was about to glimpse the truth of her skills. The F-22 pilots, who had escorted Flight 317 throughout the emergency descent, were debriefed immediately. She handled that aircraft manually in severe conditions better than any commercial pilot could. More precise than many of us in military jets under training scenarios, one of them reported. High-ranking officers listened, astonished. Recognition of her skill and professionalism began to spread across command centers nationwide. Valkyrie 1 was more than a legend. She had proven herself again, in a way the public would soon learn, and in a way that would solidify her reputation for generations of pilots. Back on the tarmac, Emily stepped out of the cockpit, surveying the scene. Rain poured down, mixing with the lights of emergency vehicles and the murmurs of a relieved crowd. Passengers began to realize just how close they had come to disaster, and gratitude poured toward the cabin crew and eventually toward her. Though she remained largely unrecognized to the public, among those who knew of the incident, a quiet respect began to form. Emergency personnel who witnessed her calm authority in the cockpit and on the tarmac marveled at her composure under unprecedented pressure. Journalists, initially kept at a distance, began asking questions. A commercial airline's official spokesperson emerged, explaining that the landing had been conducted under emergency conditions with military coordination. Mentions of F-22s, NORAD, and emergency procedures were included, but the co-pilot's role remained mostly unpublicized at first. Emily remained silent, focused on ensuring the safety of the passengers and crew. Behind her calm demeanor, she knew that the recognition would follow, but for now, her duty was complete. She ensured everyone exited safely, checked with paramedics, and maintained a presence that calmed even the most terrified passengers. Finally, after all passengers had disembarked and medical checks were underway, Emily returned to the cockpit briefly, conducting post-flight system checks. Despite her exhaustion, her focus remained razor-sharp. She noted the damage to engine components, the wear on the throttles, and minor electrical failures that had nearly caused catastrophic issues. Every detail mattered. Every observation could help prevent future incidents, guide emergency training, or inform aviation safety protocols. She documented everything meticulously, her professionalism never wavering even after the harrowing ordeal. Meanwhile, NORAD and the Air Force began processing the transmission that had carried her call sign across emergency channels. Analysts compiled radar data, communications logs, and pilot testimonies. Her name, Valkyrie 1, was repeated in hushed, awed tones across multiple control centers. Some recalled classified missions. Others recalled her legend as one of the most precise, fearless pilots ever to serve in the U.S. Navy. The convergence of a civilian crisis and her extraordinary skill had created a story that would soon dominate both military and civilian aviation circles. Emily, finally stepping away from the cockpit for the last time that day, allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Rain soaked her uniform, her hair clinging damply to her forehead, but her mind was calm. She had done what she was trained to do. She had protected lives. She had maintained control, coordinated with military assets, and landed safely under conditions that would challenge even the most seasoned pilots. And though recognition had not yet arrived, she felt the quiet satisfaction that only those who have saved lives under extreme pressure could understand. As paramedics and airline staff guided her off the tarmac, she noticed the first signs of official acknowledgement beginning to circulate. Military personnel approached with nods of respect. Airline executives offered restrained congratulations. Even the captain, who had been skeptical of his own abilities throughout the flight, now regarded her with quiet awe. "I'll never forget that," he said simply, voice full of sincerity. Emily smiled faintly, the weight of the day's events finally settling in. She had survived, led, and preserved lives. That was enough for now. And yet, in the background, the world had already begun to take notice. Word of the emergency descent, the calm authority of the co-pilot, and the extraordinary coordination with military aircraft began to circulate. The legend of Valkyrie 1, long buried in classified files, was beginning to emerge into the public eye. Emily Hayes, quiet and unassuming to most, had once again proven that skill, courage, and instinct could defy expectation, even in the most ordinary of circumstances. The morning after Flight 317's emergency landing, the story had already begun to ripple across news networks. Headlines screamed of miraculous survival, precise emergency coordination, and fighter jets that had guided a commercial airliner to safety. Yet for most viewers, the identity of the co-pilot remained a shadowy mystery. Emily Hayes, known in military circles as Valkyrie 1, had saved hundreds of lives without any immediate recognition. Her name was classified, her history buried, yet the world was beginning to sense that someone extraordinary had acted above and beyond expectation. In the airline's press briefing room, executives spoke carefully. The co-pilot and crew acted with professionalism and composure under extreme emergency conditions. One official said, carefully omitting details about her military past. Reporters scribbled furiously, asking about the mysterious military jets, the extraordinary maneuvers, and the critical decision-making that had brought the planes safely to Reno. The company could not reveal the truth. Yet every journalist in the room sensed that the co-pilot's skill had been far beyond ordinary. Meanwhile, military channels were buzzing. NORAD analysts, debriefing on the incident, repeatedly referenced the call sign Valkyrie 1. "She's real. She actually did it," one officer murmured, eyes wide as they replayed transmissions. The lead F-22 pilot described her coordination. Every movement, every subtle yoke adjustment, every calculation communicated flawlessly, guiding the jets and the plane itself. "She didn't just fly the aircraft," the pilot said. "She orchestrated an entire emergency maneuver with precision that most of us can't achieve in top-tier training simulations. She's Valkyrie 1. Emily herself remained quietly in the background, helping passengers, coordinating with airline staff, and ensuring that every minor medical concern was addressed. She declined to speak to reporters directly, aware that her military past and call sign could trigger public and bureaucratic attention she was not prepared to handle. Still, photos from the tarmac began to circulate on social media. A woman in a soaked uniform, calm amidst chaos, directing operations. Even without her name, the image spread and the world began to notice. News outlets, hungry for human drama, began piecing together accounts from passengers. She spoke calmly, never panicked, guided us through alarms, wind, and turbulence. One passenger recounted to a local reporter, "I don't know who she was, but she was incredible." Another passenger described the F-22s flanking the aircraft. "It was like something out of a movie." And the co-pilot, she was guiding it all. "We could feel her control, even though we couldn't see everything." Across the country, millions of viewers watched, captivated by a story of courage, precision, and heroism. Military personnel, however, already knew. Valkyrie 1 was more than a co-pilot. She was a legend, a woman whose skill had once turned the tide in conflicts, whose missions were classified, whose call sign carried weight and respect among elite forces. Now, that legend had intersected with civilian aviation, creating a rare and powerful story of skill applied outside of combat. The F-22 pilots who had escorted Flight 317 were interviewed, cautiously, but the praise they offered was effusive. "I've flown with Valkyrie 1 before," one said. "You trust her instinct completely. She communicates through subtle movements, micro-adjustments, and situational awareness that's nearly unmatched. Watching her today, it was as if she was still in her element. She's in her zone in the sky." And everyone around her follows. As the story gained traction, the airline reluctantly confirmed the identity of the co-pilot, careful to protect sensitive details. Co-pilot Emily Hayes played a critical role in the emergency landing, the statement read. Social media exploded. Aviation forums, military enthusiasts, and news commentators debated the miraculous skill on display. People shared articles, dissected cockpit footage, and highlighted the calm authority Emily had exhibited throughout the crisis. Her name, previously unrecognized by most civilians, was now synonymous with calm, precision, and heroism. Despite the sudden attention, Emily herself remained grounded, quietly performing her duties. She ensured that passengers were safely transported to terminals, checked on those who had minor injuries, and coordinated with emergency responders and airline staff. The public may have been awed by her actions, but she knew that the real work was never in the spotlight. The real measure of success was survival, and the fact that every single person on Flight 317 was safe. Recognition, she reminded herself, was secondary. Duty had been fulfilled. The media, however, was relentless. Interviews with passengers and cabin crew began circulating widely. She didn't just fly the plane. She commanded it, one flight attendant said. She was calm, precise, and determined. We followed her lead, and she guided us through one of the most terrifying experiences of our lives. Analysts and former pilots dissected her decisions, praising every micro-adjustment and every command. The F-22 escort in coordination with NORAD added another layer to the story. making it feel like something from a military thriller rather than a civilian emergency landing. News crews eventually attempted to contact Emily directly. She declined formal interviews initially, preferring to remain a background figure while authorities and passengers spoke. Her reticence only added to the aura of mystery surrounding her actions. Yet the world had begun to recognize the magnitude of her heroism. Even without full disclosure of her military past, it was clear that she had done more than any ordinary pilot could. Social media users began calling her the Valkyrie of Reno, drawing connections to her legendary call sign. Memes, posts, and viral videos celebrated the calm authority and precision she displayed under extreme pressure. At the military level, senior officers reviewed the incident in detail. They analyzed every aspect of the flight, from the initial emergency to the landing, highlighting her coordination with the F-22 pilots and her precise management of failing systems. "This is what operational excellence looks like," a commander noted. She applied combat training to civilian aviation flawlessly. Valkyrie 1 has proven that her skills transcend any classification or mission type. She saved hundreds today. Recognition from peers, colleagues, and command centers began to solidify her legendary status outside classified missions. Emily finally allowed a moment of reflection, stood on the tarmac, and observed the scene. Passengers were being assisted by medical staff. Cameras clicked, and social media coverage began to roll in real time. She allowed herself a quiet exhale, aware that her role as Valkyrie 1 had intersected with civilian lives in a way she hadn't anticipated. Hundreds of lives had been saved, a crisis had been averted, and the world was beginning to take notice. Still, her focus remained sharp. There were debriefs, reports, and operational follow-ups to complete. Duty never ended, even when the world applauded. As the evening drew near, news networks ran feature stories detailing the emergency descent, the F-22 escort, and the calm precision of the co-pilot. Experts debated her techniques, former pilots praised her instincts, and social media celebrated her as a hero. The legend of Valkyrie 1 had emerged publicly for the first time. She had always been extraordinary, but now the world finally saw her. Yet Emily remained modest. Recognition, she believed, was fleeting compared to the responsibility of keeping people alive. For her, the critical moments were not the accolades, but the lives saved the hundreds of passengers who would go home to their families that night because someone in the cockpit remained calm when disaster threatened. And though the world would soon learn her name, her skill, and her heroism, she understood that true valor often went unseen until the moment it was needed most. The sun had begun to set over Reno, casting a golden glow across the rain-slicked runway. Flight 317 had long been evacuated, passengers escorted to safety, and emergency crews had packed up, but Emily Hayes remained on the tarmac for a few quiet moments. She gazed at the aircraft she had guided through turbulence, failing engines, and critical alarms. The plane, now calm and still, reflected the last streaks of daylight, a silent monument to the lives saved and the crisis averted. She exhaled, letting a brief moment of relief wash over her. The adrenaline that had carried her through hours of crisis was fading, leaving space for reflection. Though her identity as Valkyrie 1 was no longer a secret, she still moved through the world with a quiet humility. Passengers would remember her as the calm co-pilot, the woman who had saved hundreds of lives, but few would grasp the depth of her military experience, her years of training, and the countless missions she had flown in dangerous airspace. To her, recognition was secondary. Duty had always come first. Training, instinct, and precision had been her constant companions. The news coverage, the social media posts, the praises from military colleagues, these were secondary echoes of what mattered most. Every passenger on that flight walking away alive. As she walked toward the airport terminal, Emily could hear whispers of her legend spreading. Reporters were still trying to catch interviews. Passengers were still sharing their stories, and military officials were debriefing and reliving the event. Even airline personnel marveled at her poise. "I've never seen anything like it," one flight attendant admitted. "She handled a situation that could have ended in tragedy with more control than anyone I've ever known." Emily nodded politely. Her focus on ensuring every passenger had assistance, every crew member was accounted for, and every detail documented for post-incident analysis. Later that evening, she finally sat in a quiet corner of the airport, a cup of coffee in hand, reflecting on the day's events. She thought about the flight, the passengers, the captain, and the F-22 pilots who had trusted her every move. She thought about the mountains, the storms, the failing engines, and the moment when instinct and skill merged seamlessly into action. Every second of the flight had been a test, a challenge, a call to apply every lesson she had learned throughout her career. And she had passed it. Hundreds of lives depended on her decisions, and she had delivered. Emily's thoughts inevitably turned inward, to her journey as Valkyrie 1, years ago. She had been one of the first female fighter pilots in the U.S. Navy, navigating complex missions, enemy fire, and impossible odds. She had faced skepticism, doubt, and constant pressure, yet she had persevered, proving herself time and again. Her military career had been filled with missions classified from public record, victories that went unacknowledged outside the military, and skills honed under extreme conditions. The lessons of discipline, calm, and precision she had learned then had prepared her for moments like today moments, when lives depended on her ability to remain composed under pressure. The phone in her pocket buzzed. It was a message from NORAD, commending her actions and requesting a formal debrief. Another message was from the airline, offering their deepest gratitude and requesting an official statement. And yet, despite the recognition pouring in, Emily felt an inner calm. She didn't need accolades or headlines. The knowledge that she had guided hundreds of people safely through the storm was enough. Her reflection was private, internal, a quiet acknowledgement that her purpose, once again, had been fulfilled. The story of Flight 317 continued to grow over the next few days. National news networks replayed footage of the emergency descent, interviews with passengers, and accounts from F-22 pilots who had escorted the plane. Aviation experts analyzed her decisions, highlighting her exceptional coordination, micro-adjustments, and ability to communicate non-verbally through subtle aircraft maneuvers. Military forums buzzed with discussion, marveling at her seamless integration of combat-honed skills into civilian aviation scenarios. The legend of Valkyrie 1 was no longer confined to classified files. It had emerged into public consciousness. Yet Emily remained grounded. She knew that heroism was not about fame. It was about action, skill, and responsibility. She remembered the fear in the eyes of passengers, the tension in the cockpit, and the trust placed in her hands. Recognition could come later. Headlines could shine, and awards could follow. But the true measure of the day was not the stories told afterward. It was the survival of everyone on Flight 317. That realization, simple yet profound, anchored her in the midst of growing public attention. The F-22 pilots reached out privately, expressing their admiration and respect. "You've done what few of us could ever imagine," one wrote. "Watching you manage that plane in extreme conditions was like watching a masterclass in aviation. Valkyrie 1 is more than a legend. You are proof that training, skill, and instinct can defy even the most impossible circumstances." Emily read the messages quietly, a small, satisfied smile forming. The acknowledgement of peers, those who truly understood the complexity of what she had done, carried weight beyond public applause. In the days that followed, Emily was invited to speak at aviation forums, military debriefings, and safety conferences. She remained careful in her speech, emphasizing procedures, calmness under pressure, and teamwork rather than personal accolades. Her philosophy was simple. Skill must be applied responsibly, instinct must be trusted, and every life matters. She became a role model not only for pilots, but for anyone in positions where precision, composure, and courage could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Yet, in her quiet moments, Emily reflected on the path that had brought her here. From a young girl fascinated by planes, to a trailblazing fighter pilot, to a civilian co-pilot faced with an extraordinary crisis, every step had built her ability to act decisively when it mattered most. Today, Flight 317 was not just a flight or an emergency. It was the culmination of a lifetime of preparation, courage, and dedication. She had become, in the most literal sense, the Valkyrie her call sign promised, a guardian in the sky, calm and unyielding amidst chaos. As the world continued to tell her story, Emily Hayes remained humble. She understood that legends were not born. They were forged through action, precision, and unflinching commitment to duty. The passengers, the captain, the airline, and even the military would remember her as a hero. But to herself, she was simply a pilot who had done what needed to be done. The Valkyrie of Reno, the co-pilot who had saved hundreds, had left her mark not in fame or headlines, but in lives preserved, trust earned, and a legacy that would inspire generations to come. As night fell over the airport, Emily looked up at the sky, calm and reflective. Somewhere above, the F-22s she had flown alongside earlier had returned to their base, but she felt their presence in memory, a silent acknowledgement of precision, skill, and trust. The world knew her now, yet she knew that heroism was quieter than headlines, deeper than public acclaim. It was measured in decisions made in the cockpit, instincts trusted under pressure, and lives saved in moments that stretched into eternity. Emily Hayes, Valkyrie 1, had guided Flight 317 from the brink of disaster to safety, proving that courage, skill, and focus could transform fear into triumph. The passengers would tell their stories. The media would recount the event. Military historians would study her maneuvers. But in the quiet moments when the storm had passed, Emily knew that her true legacy was simple. She had done what she was trained to do. She had acted when it mattered most. And she had saved lives. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the runway bathed in twilight. Emily took a final glance at the aircraft, then turned toward the terminal, steps steady, calm, and resolute. Her story, once classified and hidden, had become legend. But for her, the story was never about fame. It was about duty, skill, and the quiet, unyielding resolve to act when lives depended on it. Valkyrie 1 had returned, and the world would never forget